Well, good morning, afternoon, evening, wherever you are. I'm coming to you from beautiful Zadar, Croatia, and I'm very happy for this session to welcome our special guest, Anitha Saravanan. Anitha, welcome.
Thank you, Allan. Thank you.
Thank you for being here today. And can you tell me how you pronounce your name?
Anitha Saravanan, and I think you got it right.
Okay. Well, at least close enough. Yeah, welcome. Thank you. Where are you today located?
I am in Carroll Stream, suburbs in Chicago, in Illinois, and it's about 11:30 now. And thank you for inviting me.
Of course, of course. Well, we're here with our Zoom community, and we're going to be trying a few things today in terms of our production quality and images. We may be switching screens a little bit and experimenting as we're living into these sessions to see how they go and what works and what doesn't in this new Zoom format. So, Anitha, most interested in who you are, what you do, how you got here. You're a nurse practitioner. You're a nursing mindfulness teacher and teacher of nurses, and you are a researcher. So I'm going to leave it up to you. I think it's better to let our guest teachers describe more detail as to who they are than me try to layer that in. And so if you'd like to continue with a little bit of your bio, that would be wonderful.
Yeah, thank you, Allan. I just want to start first with gratitude and love and peace. And for having me here in the presence of this community means a lot to me.
Well, it's our pleasure. And, you know, I've kind of titled you our unofficial, official director of creativity, because what a lot of people who'll be watching this don't know that in our open theme sessions, you often let us into a very wonderful place, very profound, very deep places within defining themes for us to talk towards during our time together. So I welcome you as part of your bio as our director of creativity.
Another hat.
Yes. Thanks for accepting it.
So again, thank you. I think in this community, I feel like I belong somewhere. And I have to thank everyone who comes here, who has been coming here for weeks together for more than, I think almost 2 years I've been here. And I feel I belong here. I take this belongingness to my class and to my patients. And when I research, so I think what comes up at this time for me is not all the roles that I have or play as a mom, as a wife, or as a nurse, or a teacher, or an educator, or a researcher, but that unconditional love and belongings, which is how do we say it's needed in this community. It's hard to like explain how we can all connect in this environment collectively without love, you know. So that's where I sit with now. But I do if you want me to, I could share about my hats, you know, as a teacher, as an educator. What I would like to share first to begin with is I've lived most of my life as of date in India. As of now, more than half of my time has been spent in India. I've lived there. I was raised in a culture of authenticity in terms of accepting life. To me, belonging this community means being vulnerable, being transparent, accepting, acceptable, and being flexible. So when we lived in India, it was not unusual to see yogis, saints, in ashrams or temples or on the streets, just sitting, and meditating. But even though I lived there, it was always like you do it because you left the materialistic world, or you left, wanting to have kids, or like in crisis mode. People usually went in, like when you're in crisis. So I lived seeing that, but I never really practiced mindfulness or meditated because the culture did not embrace it and didn't bring it into the community for people to make use of it. And then coming here, that was about 20 years ago with 2 kids and $500. It was a life-changing event. I'm so glad we're here. And I was thinking of, what do I want to do with my life? Nursing invited me. I went into nursing. There was a calling. And I remember being in school and my teacher, this was almost 15 years ago, one of my teachers brought in this whole workshop of non-pharmacological practices, for example, gong meditation, biofeedback, yoga, and everything. And this is my first time really trying a gong meditation. And as I went into that for like 10, 15 minutes, it was such a deep experience that I did not want to get up. I just wanted to it was such a life-changing experience for me. But again, I did not choose to pursue it. I became a nurse. I worked in the ER. I worked on the cardiac floor, home health, name your field, pain management, rehab, until I was diagnosed with breast cancer. That was 12 years now. And looking back, when I was told you have stage 3 breast cancer, that's not an easy thing to take when you're 40 and you have kids in school, and it comes as a crisis moment. And in crisis, yes, chemo, surgery, radiation, everything works or does not work. And the physicians, even as a nurse, you know that life is, everyone has to move on and face death one day, but it doesn't hit you until you're there. And when I was faced with that situation, I remember going into the physician's office and they would give me okay, chemo days, 1, 2, 3, all the steps. But I just wanted to ask, you think I'm going to make it? Because that huge elephant in the room, it's hard for the physician to tell a 40-year-old, maybe you won't, maybe you won't. And my uncle, who's an oncologist, he came home one day and he said, yes, you could die. And I needed to hear that. And I had to accept that it was a possibility. My husband didn't take it well, but that's different. And he struggled with that because it's harder as a family member. So for the psychological piece of cancer journey, in the world of, as of now, I do not think we do enough justice for patients who come in to the clinic in the cancer centers or to any place, we do not give them enough, tools for them to embrace, to manage the psychological distress, depression, anxiety. So it's almost like, physicians and it's just like, okay, prescribe something, and nurses are like, okay, come on, let's do this, move on, bring the next patient. And healthcare in itself, it's starting to embrace. We have so much research to show, the effectiveness of all these, our techniques, mindfulness, yoga, and many, many, many other tools. And then coming back to my experience, I remember having this one instance of panic attack after I was told I had cancer, and I was 2 weeks from the time of my diagnosis. I was taking a walk around my pond, a pond close to us here, right here. And my uncle had just gone, and, he was the most supportive person. And I knew I could, being an oncologist, all I knew was, I had to listen to him, and I was wanting to be saved. But he had left. He came to visit us for the weekend. He had left, and I took a walk around the pond, and I remember feeling it was a moment of it was a split moment where I could not feel my body. It was like your body and mind are separate. And I was trying to run. I'm like, I want to run and see. Well, I'm able to run, but how is it that I can't feel my body? It was such a, a very, very difficult. And I call my uncle, and I'm like, well, what is this? Why do I feel? And he said, just come home. You're having a panic attack. But at this time today, I know if I'm going to die, that's how I'm going to feel. I mean, it's kind of a near-death experience. Thankfully, I didn't have any other attacks after that. And I am able to know and feel and how it is, and in times of meditation, when people say side effects, it's different. We have to be very careful when we term those terms like side effects, and how we move it in science with that. So with that personal experience, I took the learning, took this mindfulness class. I learned MBSR 11 years ago, and it made it much easier for me for the cancer journey and survivorship. It is not easy for any of us to know that we all know we will die, but when it comes very close, you're thinking, how do I be ready? How do I accept it? How do I tell my family? The fear and the shame and the guilt. There's so many strong emotions, and without mindfulness, I would have been lost. It would have been very difficult for me.
Yeah. Oh, thank you, Anitha. You're touching on so many things that I think bring all of us here in this community and to meditation and becoming mindfulness teachers, and this transmission to our participants of what you're speaking towards, the belonging, sense of belonging, unconditional love, looking for a way to have a different relationship to suffering and the biggest fear of suffering, which is death. So thank you so much for that personal biography, as opposed to just the hats that you're wearing. And the question I have following that up is then, how is it that you're now bringing that as a nurse practitioner, as a nursing teacher, as a nurse researcher? How are you bringing that belonging, unconditional love, shift in relationship to suffering through your mindfulness practice, your personal practice, or within programs, or the kind of research that you're engaged in?
Thank you, Allan. I think our presence when we practice mindfulness makes a difference. I think technology is not as advanced to study our electrical, energies outside. Sometimes I try to study myself. I try to, I ask my engineering son, is there something you could record on my body when I'm meditating? Because I think when we carry this mindful presence as a teacher or as a customer anywhere, it tells. And I think when I come into my classroom, when I teach my nursing students, I take that presence with me. It automatically comes in. I go there and I stand or sit with them. Last week we had an activity in class. I just knew this one student was very agitated and angry that she didn't understand what I was saying. So I would just go close and then I would sit by the chair and then ask, very simple question, what can I help with? And you could see the whole thing change. The dynamics, the calmness comes to the student because you're there mindfully present. I'm not closing my eyes, I'm not meditating, but I'm fully aware of myself and my thought and her presence there. And that also makes me bring compassion and empathy for their struggles as they strive to pass the courses. And so embodying mindfulness, not just for those 20 minutes of my day, closing my eyes and doing it and not, embodying it and embracing it as much as possible on a daily basis into my classroom. I don't know if that will be as, effective. As far as my patients, I remember this time when I had a very, very, how do you say, angry, agitated patient, again, very anxious. She had had several back surgeries and they had screws and plates in her back for her lower back pain. And she was so frustrated. And I asked her, again, we need to carry that presence, I asked her, have you ever thanked your body for it accepting the screws and the plates? And have you thought of thanking the screws and the plates themselves for being there so they could help you stand? And the next day she sees the physician and she goes, your nurse practitioner cured me. So, and then he'd make a joke. He'd be like, you want to cure my next patient? So I think as teachers, as mindfulness teachers or practitioners, embodying it and applying it in everyday practice, it is challenging. It's not easy. And I think the most learning I get out of my own life is I try to accept many things, many roles, many hats. And then after accepting all of those, how do you still be mindful? That's $1 million question. I'm trying to figure out.
Yeah,
And the last thing is,
Go ahead. I was just going to comment on that balance of caregiving and the beautiful no, and how we move with that to find that balance. So, yeah, you're touching on that. But go ahead. I interrupted you. The last thing.
Oh, that's okay. I think the last part of my job is as a researcher. This is something new to me. I got my doctorate in nursing science. It's almost 3 years now. And I've always wanted to take mindfulness, and have this as a foundation for helping pain patients. So I just, I'm trying to see how I can use mindfulness for health promotion in the community of older adults. What I am trying to come up with is a model called pain hygiene model, where I will be, teaching patients to use mindfulness in their daily activity by using paced activities and making lifestyle changes. So what I'm hoping to do is applying and helping patients embody and embrace and apply mindfulness through this program that I'm currently working on. So I think in the past, looking back in ancient practices, it was like people did it because they did not have, like for diseases or for challenges in life. They just tried to or they wanted to study about the mind. They went into meditation. But with mindfulness, with John Kabat-Zinn's beautiful program, we're in a place where we're using it for our own well-being. And this has been tested scientifically. And there is overwhelming evidence that it works in many different, of course, in chronic pain and cancer and many other settings, without doubt. What I'm hoping is that in the future, that mindfulness will be embraced more. And you never know, right? Like in ancient worlds and our forefathers lived, they looked at life differently and they didn't have the technology. But I think we've already opened the doors for our Gen Z and the future generations to use this and improvise it. I am not sure if you've heard of things like reality shifting, that these TikTokers are going into. Their 8 billion views. And I'm in the middle. I'm like, on one end, wow, that's scary. And on the other end, who am I to judge them? Who am I to judge the next generation of, mindfulness teachers? And where is the limit? And how do we draw those? Who draws those?
Yeah. Well, that's a big question, and that is the big question. Who? Does the Dharma take care of itself, or do people take care of the Dharma? And I'm touched in many ways, Anitha, as always with your transparency. And I would like to be transparent in return. My ex-wife, married twice, current wife of almost 15 years, and my first wife developed, after we were divorced some time, a very aggressive form of breast cancer. And ironically enough, she also had a rod on her spine. So you've touched me in two very personal ways around her condition. And it leads me to the question that I have for you, which is, why do you think, or in what view do you have, there's so much, seemingly so much breast cancer? Do you have any thoughts about that? Is that it's just simply being detected more, or there's a causation there?
As a researcher,
Mm-hmm.
I think studies are being done to identify environmental factors and to study epigenetics. But we're still far behind to see, I mean, genetically with the BRCA mutation and things like that, we know that's the genetic part, the mutation part. But what we don't know is what are the factors that can play in. They're still, scientists are still looking at if foods or certain toxins and certain, like things like plastic can contribute to our, the style of living too. And there are studies to show that when women, like in a large Japanese study, women who migrated, from Japan, they were diagnosed 8 years from around the time of their diagnosis. They were about 8 years since they moved from their home country. For me, it was the same. It was 8 years since I moved. So I'm also thinking gut microbiome, and there's a lot of interesting studies being done in that. And if my body was used to, a different country where the foods were not, produced in the same way, the soil and the microbes that we share are very different compared to a Western diet. So that it's going to be very interesting. I do agree that there is more detection, but there's also more cases. It used to be 1 in 8 were diagnosed. Now it's 1 in 6. But overall, 1 out of 2 would be diagnosed with cancer after 65. That's another compelling statistic. So
Interesting. What about in men?
in men, I think the number 1 cancer, I do not have the stats right off now, but prostate cancer is on the rise. Lung cancer is also on the rise. So followed by cardiac conditions, it's getting in the US at least. Cancer is like second most reason for mortality.
Yeah, it seems to be a lot of that in men in those ways too, but also some breast cancer.
Yeah.
We don't often think about it, but I'm aware of it. Well, my current wife's a painter. She's an artist, a true artist. I'd say born an artist. And she's working on a painting now, and her teacher said something which I find really interesting, which kind of relates to something you said about the TikTokers. And I want to come back to that because I'm not quite clear what you meant about reality shifting, did you say? So the art teacher said the value does all the work. The value in the painting, the tonality and the different values of colors do all the work. The color gets all the credit. So visually, we're often looking at the color of a painting, but it has a certain value to it. So if I just kind of mix that into, as a metaphor, into the value and the, as I was referring to before, the Dharma teachings. And it's also fascinating the way this work comes back to places like India and China. I call it work, but the teachings come back to those places, that in some ways seem to have, it has left. And ironically, mindfulness teachers bring that back. So what do you see? Because you're working with younger students and you're talking about TikTok and this, am I correct, reality shifting? Is that what you said? How do you see the integrity or the value being maintained within your vision of what's becoming available with technology?
Yeah, this is a great question. So if we think of the value in the painting and the colors, the space defines it too. The space and the noise that's caused by the colors or the values could be redefined by the space. I think we're in a time of, or if you want to call like a space where before the new thing comes, like I think we're already discussing about what happens when, people go into deep meditation. And, I think the next generation or the newer TikTokers have taken it to another extreme. Honestly, I do not know the full, the meaning and the extent of this term called reality shifting, sorry. But in classroom, when I ask my students, how many of you have tried mindfulness practices or do you meditate? Most often it's a no. And last week, one student said, yeah, I can believe reality shifting because I meditate and I know what it means. So it's almost like it's going to be very curious. I'll be very curious to know how that shift happens. It took more than 100, so many centuries before ancient practices was, like skillfully brought by John Kabat-Zinn for us, for us to use and to be tested and scientifically proven. And it's going to be interesting to see how now the next shift with technology is going to happen. I don't think I'm necessarily fearful. I'm open-minded. I can, even in education, I think there's a big shift happening in an education, with COVID and online classes. There's talks about maybe we should do this like Netflix and have one whole online platform. And there's a lot of discussions about how education will go. And I think with mindfulness, we have the platform, and if we know what it means, and if we can authentically, like teach it and have it applied and embraced in any form, like how I'm trying to do, use it to evolve it and apply it. And I think many people have done that already. Like every mindfulness practice that's being evolved is a great process. One thing that I don't think we will know, maybe I don't even wish to know now, or maybe we are just scared, is that what happens when, when I can meditate and I could tell that I have this mind body, without having that panic attack moment, right? That shifting. Is that what the newer, generations call it as reality shifting? I don't know. So maybe we call it panic attacks. Maybe they call it differently. And I personally think that if I'm going to meditate, this is where I think science and researchers need to like clarify mindfulness to keep it in the science and to help healthcare. We want to really quantify what do we mean by those side effects? Are those really side effects? And what do we mean by them? And for that, we need community of teachers like us to understand clearly what the students tell us when they have such experiences. Clarity. For example, if a patient is given a medication, let's say blood pressure medication, we know the dose can cause hypotension, lower blood pressure. We know that that's a side effect. So we modify it. That might not apply to this. So because it's something that you're practicing every day, and you're self-managing, if you want to, for lack of other words. You're self-managing your practice. Every practitioner, every student, after a certain point, I'm not saying in year 1, year 2, you got it, like, I think it takes time. And then so we need teachers who would know this part and help newer students, especially when we see newer generations. They might come into class and tell in an MBSR class or MBCT class, I have done reality shifting, now tell me. So just being aware, I think, and being open and transparent is my humble opinion. I mean, again, I could be wrong. Well, thank you for
Well, thank you.
listening.
Thank you, Anitha. Thank you for your presence, which I'll call presencing, I think is very strong. And everybody who comes in contact with you is fortunate to have that. And I appreciate your being with us today. So what I'd like to do now is open it up and see if we have any questions in the time that we have remaining from those of us that are gathered here on Zoom. Any questions for Anitha? We'll also have our chance to gather back in community together, but for right now on the recording, anybody sitting with a question? And if not, that's okay. Okay, Helen?
When I joined today with Anitha speaking, I was really hoping to hear one of her poems, that she would perhaps lead us in a bit of, eyes closed, a little bit of a meditation with her poem. And I don't know if we're there, but if it's possible, I'd like to ask for that.
Anitha, are you prepared?
Yeah, I could.
Okay.
I remember going through cancer, and I would journal, and I would have visions of healing myself, if you want to say manifestation of my own reality to make sure I'm alive. And I wrote in my diary, I'll never forget this part. After a day of chemo, and it's brutal, the 2 days, the body just, takes a big hit. And I was lying in my bed, and I took my pen and I wrote, clean shaven head, dry eyes, lifeless body, why was I chosen? Just to share, one person at a time. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. I remember walking. I traveled to India after my diagnosis. And the purpose and the calling came back very strongly. I'll share my story to one person at a time. And I still do.
Thank you, Helen. I'm so happy you asked for one of Anitha's poems. And Anitha, thank you for sharing that, and one person at a time with us today, and those that see this. Thank you for this. Jesse, would you like to ask Anitha a question?
Yes, thank you. Oh my goodness, such an inspiration. I love how Allan explained about the presencing, and just it's like an embodiment of co-regulation. That's how I feel this whole hour. I've just felt really settled. It's been lovely. And I love the stories of how this practice in daily life is important for us all. So take in our hearts. And my question's a little shift from that of a poem to, I was very interested in your research around pain management and what you're doing with that. And it just this morning, I right early in the morning, I think at 3 something, I had some thoughts about that around mindfulness, and how for people who have who are in pain clinics, or like in my case, trauma and brain injury, learning mindfulness, coming to the present and finding pain and finding panic. I found it very difficult to learn with that. And so I made this decision to modify so that I could do it, because I found it too overwhelming. And what I was thinking about this morning is what my body did at that time was to kind of say, okay, right now I have to learn attentional awareness. It's really enough for me to just come to the present with anchors that aren't scary or painful. That's already hard enough. That's like the core skill, and it's really hard to learn. And especially if you have a lot of pain and panic, then that's pulling you away. So I just want, I don't know, I just want to throw that out at you, this idea of dividing those two, so that eventually it's so important to let go of our resistance to our pain and to know that we can handle it. So yes, we absolutely, full mindfulness awareness of what's the pain is important, but I just wondered, what have you learned about mindfulness and pain management and how do my reflections land on you?
That's a very deep question. So I think most of us at some point, particularly if you're older like me, we have pain in several areas. So what I'm trying to study now is to not to go into acute pain situations, to only look at chronic pain and only consider populations who have something called non-specific low back pain, meaning their pain is not attributed to a specific diagnosis. So it's kind of vague, and there's no MRI studies to show there's anything. And what research has shown is that when patients have those type of non-specific pain, and it's usually accompanied with depressive mood, they can't sleep, they have fatigue. And the hope is to capture this group of populations earlier on, before they get to the point of panic attacks and, severe worsening of those symptoms. Again, this will not fit everybody. And again, like mindfulness, it's going to be one tool, one of the many tools they might have to use. And particularly with trauma and, what you see and what you do, it's very compelling, Jesse. And I think that's one of the challenges too, when we try to apply mindfulness in different settings. There's no one size fits all. But if we clearly define, that these are some of the possibilities, then maybe one day in the future, the providers can give this as a prescription. And I think last week, she mentioned about, I don't know, someone, I'm not sure who did, they're mentioning about coverage for primary care, having mindfulness being covered. So the hope is that, in primary practice, if a patient comes with, example, let's say they hurt their back moving or like gardening one day, and they come in to the clinic, and at that time, if we know this person already has depressive mood, fatigue, and sleep problems, we know we can already predict how they might evolve. So before they get to the point of having severe depressive or other psychological distress symptoms, we could offer them these techniques. I don't think I would agree with saying accepting your pain, but sometimes it's hard for people. And we shouldn't say that it's not safe if it's a potential severe, injury that caused the pain. So slowly threading it from a promotion practice for people who have not really learned how to self-care, for lack of a better word. I hope I answered, Jesse.
Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you, Jesse. Thank you, Anitha. Well, thank you. This is our time, and a joy to have you, Anitha. And you'll continue on as our Director of Creativity as long as you accept that hat. I appreciate you today and your time with us.
Click down below to join our Mindfulness Teacher community Facebook group, where you're also invited to post and share. Also, subscribe to Sing to the Mountain Studio so you don't miss out on future recordings of live sessions.